Greg Nibbler with Fox 12 Oregon. Thanks everybody for joining us right now. And if you have been following along, it seems that Governor Kotek, after her 100 days in office, does not have the world's greatest approval rating. In fact, the lowest approval rating, it seems, in the United States. So we're going to talk about that, some other statistics, some different things that are going on and trends that we're seeing with Oregonians in general. And to do so, we're joined now by John Horvick from DHM Research. John, as always, so great to talk to you. And let's start off with this approval rating. I know you put out a tweet about this, going through all these other governors and where theirs are and where our governor happens to be. Why do you think that is?
Well, so the polling outfit called Morning Consult each quarter does polling on approval ratings of every single governor in the country. Been doing it for several years right now, so we can track both how the current governor is doing, but also compare to where Governor Brown was when she was in office. So if you look at Morning Consult's polling, Governor Kotek has the lowest approval rating of any governor in the state. When Governor Brown left office, she also had the lowest approval rating of any governor in the country. So there's a carryover between the two administrations. Now, there are some important differences. One, if we look at what we call the net approval, meaning the number of people or the percentage of people who disapprove of her performance versus the number or percentage of people who approve. So it's actually net positive. So there are slightly more people who approve of her than disapprove of her. So why could she be at the bottom? Well, part of it is a lot of Oregonians just don't know much about her yet. They're learning about her. They don't have their mind made up about her. So the opportunity for her to have a higher approval rating doesn't quite exist yet in the public's mind because they're still learning, getting to know her. Now, that's the rosy colored view of the results. The fact of the matter is that Oregonians are divided. And Governor Kotek won the election. I can't remember the exact percentages, but something around 45, 46% of the vote. So most people voted against her in the 2022 election, either voted for the Republican Christine Drazan or Betsy Johnson. So, it's not surprising, given that fact, that, early in her term, she hasn't won voters over yet. Long ways to go. She's got another, nearly 4 years in this term, and we'll see where things head. But divided state, the carryover from where we were in the previous administration, and she won a contested election in a race where most people wanted somebody else.
And it seems that if I understood those percentages correctly, that it's actually gone down, from what she won by. So she's actually lost people. Is that fair?
Well, no, that's probably not quite the right way to think about it, because in an election, right, you don't have the option to say I don't know. Right. So, but in a survey, you do. So it's not quite an apples to apples comparison to look at it that way. In election, people might have voted for her or voted against her, but at this point are evaluating her with an open mind. And you don't get that choice in an election.
How does this compare, just overall with what Oregonians are maybe feeling? Is this something that's specifically about her? Is this more general, do you think, or do the numbers show that this is kind of across the board, that they're just unhappy or unsure?
Well, I think I'd start with, what do we know that Oregonians are upset about? Or what do we know about how Oregonians feel about the state? Maybe even start there. One of the classic ways that pollsters like us at THM ask this question are, all things considered, do you think the state's heading in the right direction, or are things off on the wrong track? And these are things that we've been measuring at DHM since, for 40 plus years, and pollsters like us have been doing it for longer. And if we look at the right track numbers right now, I think in our last survey, something in the mid-20s of percentage of Oregonians thought that the state was headed in the right direction. Those are historically low numbers. Just that they are, when I say historically low, I don't mean they're just below average. I mean, they are towards the bottom that we've ever measured. So the electorate's very upset with the way that things are going in the state. And we know that the things that they're upset about, predominantly it's concerns around homelessness, crime, and cost of living. I mean, those are the dominant issues in voters' minds. Now, when Governor Kotek came to office, she said that some of her top priorities are addressing homelessness. And within her first 100 days, she got passed a major package with bipartisan support. I think it's something around $200 million towards housing and homelessness in the state. Now, voters ultimately are going to judge her performance on whether or not that improves the conditions of people who are homeless, improves or reduces unsanctioned camping across the state. But she went into office with a promise, and she was successfully able to deliver on that promise in the first 100 days. And so, that is something that I suspect voters will be paying attention to and judging whether or not that policy delivers the outcomes that they're looking for. But to sort of back to your question, voters are upset. Voters are upset about those key things, and no Governor Kotek or Christine Drazan had won. Christine Drazan wouldn't be able to turn that ship around in 100 days, and voters are gonna be grumpy until they see improvements.
And you mentioned some of that being, or at least as far as maybe a carryover from Governor Brown, because it is only 100 days in, so we have some carryover from the pessimism or maybe disapproval that was going on there. Let's talk about that kind of compared to nationally, going back to where the approval of Oregonians are, of their governors. Is this a trend that's nationwide, where people, even at the top end, are unhappy, or are there places where people are actually very happy about their governors?
No, it's there does, sort of state level, like everybody upset at the state level, and how does that maybe compare to what's happening nationally? Nationally, it's almost impossible to find a Republican who has a positive impression of President Biden, and almost every Democrat feels at least warm towards the president, and it was the reverse when President Trump was in office. But there are circumstances, there are places where, for example, Republican governors are quite popular in blue states. Phil Scott in Vermont, for example, a Republican governor, very popular in his state there. He's since left office, but Larry Hogan in Maryland is a Republican in a blue state that was quite popular. Charlie Baker in Massachusetts, again, he's recently left office, but was very popular, a Republican there. The Democratic governor in Kentucky, a red state, but quite popular there. So there are examples where we see not only governors be popular in their state, but be popular in states that sort of run against what their party is. So it's possible. Oregon does stand out if you really sort of look at not only is Governor Kotek at the bottom of the list, and Governor Brown is at the bottom of the list as well, but really does stand out as a place where we're having I'll say little political success among our governors, because there are plenty across the country that are approved of, and in ways that run counter to their state's politics.
Well, going back into kind of the state level and talking about that, where kind of the citizens are looking at, you mentioned, those main things that they're concerned with being homelessness, I believe was one of them. Perhaps it was housing costs. Can you kind of dial in a little bit about what those are?
Yeah, homelessness is the big one, and homelessness is complicated, complex in people's minds. But I do think that when people are expressing that their biggest concerns about homelessness, the image that they have, the concern that they have is unsanctioned camping, and then associated concerns with drug addiction and mental health. Homelessness is more complicated than that image, in fact, but I do think that's what people are most upset about, frustrated about, and want to see address. So that's number one for sure. And by the way, that's not just a Portland thing. If I look back at DHM surveys that we've done across the state in individual communities, big cities, small towns, urban, rural, you name it, in the last 3 years, there's been only one community where we've asked the question, what's the most important issue in your community, where they didn't say homelessness. So it's more acute in Portland. It's more acute perhaps in the Portland metro area, but it is something that is Oregonians across the state are worried about. The other big one is crime. Increases in crime have certainly got people's attention and worry and like to see addressed. And then the other is really cost of living, rising cost of goods and services, and with that, housing costs. Those are the three big issues in voters' minds right now.
Looking at just one other thing too here, then this was something again I noticed that I love going through all the surveys, just kind of seeing where people are at. It's fascinating. It can be I was on there for a long time yesterday, probably.
Good.
But one of them though, talking about just legislatively, just kind of where people are wanting to push things, where Oregonians are wanting things to go. I noticed that there's different pushes towards certain agendas, and you certainly have like the trans rights being something, I guess, looking at the issues like that. Are those things that are at the forefront after all of these other things, or really is it just the houseless, housing costs, homelessness, all of that just kind of takes the bulk of what people are concerned with?
They matter. Cultural issues, and I put that in a large category. That sometimes people might say that and minimize it as just a cultural issue, but just to separate it from things like the economy.
Sure.
They certainly matter to voters. Now, this is where I think public opinion research is really instructive, because if we ask Oregonians what the most important issue is in the state, or ask people in the local community the issue in their community, or ask Americans what the most important issue is in the country, things like trans rights rarely show up as a top issue for folks. Now, that doesn't mean that those issues aren't deeply important to individuals, or that people aren't motivated and organized around those and the different sides that people may take. And I think what we see right now is a lot of intensity in organizing on both sides, but I'd say particularly on the side of those who want to slow down or restrict trans rights, or maybe say a different way, who are concerned about the changes that are occurring. I think there's more motivation and energy and heat on that side right now. If we look at open-ended comments a year ago to this sort of question, what's the most important issue? Just things like these issues around trans rights, or women in how women's sports sort of rules are set, just were not showing up at all. And now they are. They're a minority of comments for sure, but they're showing up in a place that they weren't before. And so if you look at the language and the intensity and the feeling around it, is much more on those who are concerned about changes that they are observing than those who are advancing them. So they play and they matter. One of the things that I like to look at is something called Google Trends. And Google Trends, it's Google, and you can see trend lines of how frequently words are searched, and you can also see geographically where words are searched the most. Now, this isn't exactly just sort of trans rights issues or gender issues, but where you look at the word woke, right? So that category, whatever it means, of woke, where that word is searched the most is in retirement communities in Florida. So like the number one place, I think, if I looked the other day, was still the Villages in Florida. And I do think that that is I think a good example of it is motivated and organizing sort of the right wing activists in a particular, perhaps older, more conservative sort of Fox sort of news viewing, so national Fox News viewing sort of audience, and much more than it's energizing liberals.
Yeah.
And so it's sort of that counter sort of reactionary sort of political interest is what we're really seeing.
That is fascinating that's where it's most searched. Now I definitely have to go take a look at that myself. Well, John, anything else that you want to add into just about what you're doing and all this research? I know there's so many great polls that come out. Anything to let people know about, how to follow along with everything?
Well, they can certainly, check out our website, dhmresearch.com. I'm active on Twitter, and I try to, do a lot of Oregon political history, lots of charts and graphs. And so if you're interested in the numbers and seeing things across time, particularly in maps, you can follow me at Horvick. And then I'd say maybe just one other thing that I've been thinking a lot about, and I don't have a great answer, is what's missing from the conversation, and what was part of the conversation maybe 5 years ago, 10 years, 15 years ago, that's less so now. And the one I'd really call out is education. K-12 education used to always be the number one or number two issue on voters' minds in Oregon. I used to say in given presentations, it's, the top issue is jobs and the economy, and education is just a question of which one's going to be on top. When the economy is doing well, It means education would end up on top, and when the economy was struggling, education would fall number two. And education has just really fallen off the list. And I think likely the most important reason for that is it's being crowded out by other highly salient issues like homelessness. But it's notable. We have declining schools enrollment. We have an aging population. Those could be reasons too. But as much as we talk about what's on voters' minds, I think it's good to ask ourselves too, is what's not, and how maybe that's changed over time. And that's really one that I've been thinking a lot about, and will be trying to bring some attention to in the days and weeks ahead.
That's great. That's a great way to think about that too. Yeah, what is not on people's minds? Well,
Mhm.
John, as always, it's so great to talk to you. Really appreciate your time and in joining us here to discuss all of this wealth of information. So again, you can check out all of that research at DHM Research. And for Fox 12, I'm Greg Nibbler.